State your goals and your ambitions. I think at least I had that, right, where in the early years I was just uncomfortable to be ambitious or be aspirational. So I think don't hesitate on that. Second is, I think, continuously step outside of your comfort zone. Like for me, I stepped from product to strategy to BD to sales to different things. Step outside your comfort zone, because I think growth comes from that. And I think for women, it's absolutely important to have a support ecosystem at home and in the workplace, because that's the only way you can manage a career. So be ambitious, step outside of your comfort zone, and have a support ecosystem.
Hi Vasuta, welcome to Sell Side Conversations. It's a pleasure having you here.
Great being here, Gautam. Thank you for having me for this.
So Vasuta, I was sort of going through a LinkedIn profile. It's very impressive. Starting out at Intel, then Goldman Sachs, Mckinsey, and then at InMobi, and moving to the top job at InMobi. So we'll cover in a conversation your journey, your experiences, all of those things.
Sure.
So let's begin by at the starting point. How did your education, your childhood, something that influenced you as a child while growing up?
So I'm from Lucknow. So I spent all of my early years, childhood, and my entire schooling till the age of 18 or so in Lucknow. Grew up in we were a joint family. So a lot of my early years in my childhood, right, there was a lot of influence from different people in the family. Because my parents were both working. My parents were both professors.
Oh, wonderful.
They used to teach in Lucknow University, and so I was sort of brought up, in an environment where there was a lot of, grandparents, uncles, aunts. So I think the first 11, 12 years of my life was, a fairly large family in which I was brought up. Like any other sort of, you can say, and I think the interesting part for me influence wise was that in some ways I always growing up saw two facets of life. One was the very academic side, because my parents were both professors, and also the business side, because we were actually a business family.
Oh, really?
So
okay.
My grandfather set up his business in Lucknow in the 1950s when he moved there. So my dad, being the eldest in the family, which was very large, was sort of responsible for that. And because he had his own, academic interests and his own profession, so he ended up sort of, double or dual rolling like all of his life. So that played a very big part, you can say, in my growing up years, right? Because I saw both aspects. And the other big influence was also, my mom. She was a working parent in the 80s, which was obviously, not easy for women at that time. So looking after a, very large family, working, obviously looking after me. So I think that taught me a lot about, you can say, responsibility, balance, managing, work and family at a very early stage.
Correct.
Because my parents were sort of building their life ground up while trying to, raise and look after a large family. So
did you lean towards academia or business? Any early preferences you remember?
I think, because of there being a very strong academic environment at home, I obviously, I enjoyed school and not just the, the studies part of it. I liked all the extracurriculars part of it as well, right? Sports, theater, debating. These were a lot of things that I really enjoyed during my school years. So I think there was some leaning towards academia, and I think for the longest time I was convinced that I would end up as a teacher or professor myself.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because both parents, and it's like doctors, right? You always have doctors in the family. But I think for the longest time, and that's what I thought I will land at. But I think the great part was that my parents never really put any pressure on any profession per se, saying, oh, because we are professors, you should also go down that line, or you must be a doctor, or you must be an engineer. There was never that pressure.
Got it.
Which I think helped me find also my own likes, dislikes at a very early stage. And that helped a lot because I had a lot of, you can say, independence of thinking and decision making from a very early age.
Okay. So starting from Intel to as you progressed, can you sort of talk us about how did the shift happen from Intel to McKinsey and InMobi?
So Intel, I joined just after my engineering. And I think one of the reasons for me to also join there, because, I think in the 2000s, most jobs were more software jobs, right, at that time. And typically people, would end up, in some of those. And I was very happy to land at Intel. I was fortunate in some ways to land there because I had an electronics engineering degree.
Okay.
And, so it was a good fit in that way. And it was not just coding, right? It was, digital circuits and, chip design and so on. So it was interesting in that way. But, in about 12 to 18 months, what I started figuring out was that, while this was something which was interesting, and would probably keep me very engaged and even push me to learn, it was not something I saw myself doing 10 years down the line.
Got it.
So in 12 to 18 months that started becoming very clear to me. And how I sort of assessed that was that when I looked at people who were, let's say, principal architects or staff engineers at Intel, right, people who were my mentors or super bosses, I did not see myself in
doing
their
that role.
roles.
Correct. That didn't excite you so much.
That didn't excite me, right? And so very early on, I was able to make that decision that this is not where I want to be a decade down. And so I started, sort of preparing for MBA. Didn't make it in the first attempt, and then second attempt also I sort of scraped through because my CAT percentile was not great, but somehow I got a call from IIM Bangalore. I got one call and I converted that, so that was really fortunate.
Wonderful.
So I think the MBA experience was very good that way because it exposed me to life beyond engineering.
Got it.
The courses, just the peer group. I think all that was really good to understand, but I would not, if people are thinking that, you will find your calling after MBA, I don't think that's true at all. I can definitely say that now after 15 years of passing out, that it's not like you find that just by, doing a degree, right? So I was quite confused even at that time, where I wanted.
But a good MBA from a good university sort of gives you the
gives
peer network and set of general skills that you learn and can use it.
Absolutely.
Later
I
on.
think it gives you a strong foundation, and definitely the peer network and the learning from there. Unfortunately, 2009 was an extremely bad year because this was just after the financial crisis.
Correct.
So while I interned at Goldman Sachs, I didn't really get a pre-placement offer from them, and so life was very stressful in that 1 year because everyone was literally just trying to see how to get some job out of college. But again, I think I specialized in that one offer and then trying to convert that. So I think that's how McKinsey happened for me. Just out of they made one offer, and I managed to get that from college. I think the McKinsey experience for 3 years was phenomenal in a lot of ways, right? Because I didn't know what I was getting into, but I think what consulting does is it prepares you for a huge, I would say, a breadth of experience in the early years, because one day you're working with a government client, one day you're working with a finance client, manufacturing client, right? And so you are forced to push your boundaries.
So the breadth of experiences, learning about the domain and all of those things
in a very short
time. So you have to assess a lot of information, absorb it, and then
you have to be able to absorb it at a level where you can go and talk to senior clients, right? At a, say, VP, SVP, CXO level at the client's
Correct.
Right. So that was, I think, the learning part of it, right? Processing so much and then being able to, go and have a meaningful, impactful conversation about it with a senior group. So that was, I would say, a lot of learning in a very short time.
And has this skill helped you in your journey so far?
Oh, absolutely.
Now that when you see...
Yeah, because I think compared to that, a lot of times it seems, okay, this I can learn in 6 months, right? Because there are a lot of times you were literally absorbing things overnight or, in a few weeks. So that helped for sure, right? The ability to assimilate, process, and also how you need to show up in front of, say, senior clients in in a very early sort of, I was in my mid to late 20s at that time, right? So how do you actually go and have a conversation with the CEO of a company?
How do you do that?
So
what are the things I want you to keep in mind when having a conversation with the CEO?
See, I was never very flamboyant in a lot of ways, right? I'm not a spontaneous person. So I think for me, it's always been a lot about preparation, right? So even today, right, if I have a very important meeting, whether a client meeting, partner meeting, even an event, I put in a lot of preparation to appear spontaneous.
Got it.
So it was a lot of preparation in those days, right?
So there's no shortcut to success. There's a lot
don't-
of hard work
yeah,
one has to
at
put in.
least, I didn't find that yet, but some people are naturally good at it. I've seen some of my colleagues and friends. It just comes naturally to them as well, and I think those people are very lucky. But at least I had to put in a lot of hours to get to that. So that was, I think preparation was a big part of it. And then I think for a lot of these conversations, what helped was that, was being as authentic and as real as you can be, because I think over a period of time, it's very hard to be someone else.
Absolutely.
And to fake it, right? So I think again, that was a realization early on that people at any level appreciate authenticity, they appreciate honesty, right? So I think bringing a mix of that, preparation with authenticity and honesty helped at that time, and it continues to be what I lean on in a lot of my conversations, interactions, and how I operate.
Got it.
So yeah, that's sorry. So Mckinsey, and then my InMobi move was a little bit a combination of professional and personal reasons, because again, I think in consulting I had a moment where I realized that while this is good and great from a learning sense, what I felt I was missing was that I wanted to really own something end to end. Because consulting was about doing something for 6 to 9 months and then moving to the next project or next client. And I didn't get that sense of satisfaction or fulfillment from seeing something through. And I felt that was something I really wanted. So I was very keen to move to, one sector or one industry where I could really, do something end to end. And that's how sort of, InMobi, and, I wanted to move to Bangalore. There was a lot of, startups were not known at the time, so it was a huge leap of faith at that time, but I'd heard great things about the founders. I had a few of my MBA batchmates already here, and they, recommended the place and founders highly, so I just landed up here, had 2 conversations, and I was like, okay, I'm doing this. So it was not an objective decision at all.
So can you tell us what the conversation was? How did the founders assess you, and how was that initial conversation? What were they looking for, at that point of time?
So I think, that time InMobi had just raised, a huge round of funding from SoftBank. So they were obviously in a very, very high, super fast, growth phase, and they were looking to, get people who would be able to, sort of help with that growth, right? And given that, consulting equips you with some of those skills, right, on how to operate in a high-paced environment, learn, and still produce outcomes. So that skill set helped from a role lens, because the role that I initially got into here was actually a founder staff role, working closely with the founders on everything from strategy to execution in the early days. So that's how the skill assessment happened. And I think for me, what was what really resonated was that we were trying to build this technology powerhouse from India for the world, right? Obviously, you've had all the Infosys and, TCS of the world which did that, but more from a services and, IT services lens. And here there was, company trying to build a product company from India for the world, and that really sort of resonated with me. It was very powerful. So it just clicked in that way. And yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So now that you've joined in the founders team and sort of helped them in the initial days, then you moved on to sort of doing supply side partnerships, and then eventually now, leading monetization. And so how did you sort of equip yourself with some of these things? Because you didn't come from the media advertising background, so obviously you had to learn the and given your background, you could learn pretty quickly. But how did you sort of move up the chain?
So I think when I joined in the founders strategy team, I think one thing I was clear on, that in a year's time frame I did want to move to a functional role, because that was my sort of reason for even moving out of, say, consulting, right? I wanted to get into one sector, one role where I could own something. So I think in that way, the founders were really supportive. I actually tried, so you can say it was a hit and trial for for a period of maybe a year. Where I tried a product role, there was an opportunity there. So I did product management for 7-8 months. I did, strat and ops for a new 0 to 1 BU for a while. And then I moved to a BD role, which was truly about, client facing, partnerships, revenue and so on. So it took like 3-4 iterations to, find what really excited me, and there was an opportunity as well. And I think honestly, not everybody gets that. And I was very fortunate that way, that I got the ability to experiment, right, for 12 to 18 months in different roles, and then really find something which I liked and which added value to the organization as well, right?
So in the BD role is also, partnerships and trying to convince the other party to sort of do a deal. And especially if you are a relatively new company,
right,
and you're trying to do a deal with a bigger company. So there's always a little friction, there's a little bit of reluctance, hesitance, time taking. How do you sort of overcome all of those things? What are the things, some challenges you faced, and if you could mention a significant partnership that you did and which was sort of satisfying but was arduous to do it?
Yeah, so I think core part of my BD role in those 2-3 years was our SDK distribution, because InMobi has a monetization SDK, right? The ads monetization SDK, which we used to distribute to all app developers, right? Anyone who wants to monetize through ads, we used to distribute our SDK, and our competitors were like big giants who had the ads SDK. So obviously it was not a.
Who were big competitors at that point of time?
You had the AdMob SDK from Google. I think later Facebook came with their, Fan SDK at the time. Then some of these, gaming specialized companies also came up. So there was, a fair bit of competition. And I think what we went in with was, we said, okay, let's first choose the segments and the markets, right, where we want to go in, because we also wanted to operate with a tight lean team and so on. So we did a little bit of that prioritization. So I think prioritization is important when you are going in with a lot of B2B type products and so on, and prioritization of segments and markets especially, right?
More focused approach is what is
more focused approach, instead of trying to spray and pray and spread yourself too thin, because that gives you a sense of, okay, which customers can you really serve and whose needs can you really serve. So I think we were very clear that gaming, for example, was something that gaming clients that we could double down on. Then we knew that US and Europe were very big markets at that time from a monetization lens, ad monetization. So we really doubled down there in terms of investment and so on. And then we also were very clear at that time itself that we would be able to differentiate if we focused on, say, the whale and mid-tier client instead of focusing too much on the long tail and so on.
Got it.
Right. So that was our, sort of strategy, right? The gaming, the markets, and the type of customer.
So if I were to summarize it, more focused strategy and identifying this is my core segment, I'm going to attack and capture it. And then sort of move on to the next one.
Yeah. So how do you create a winning play for a segment instead of trying to,
carpet bomb everything?
Yeah. So that was our approach, and that helped. That really worked. We worked with some of the largest, game developers at the time. Any casual game that you could, think of at that time, we were working with them, right, across US and Europe. So that was, an exciting time for the company. We expanded.
Any gaming developers you can.
I don't know if you've played that game. Subway Surfers was a very popular game. So they used to be a very, key partner for us at the time. That's what I remember. I mean, it's been 8-9 years, but
okay.
Yeah. So some of those, right, similar type of developers and so on. So yeah, that was a great time for us to build out the distribution, basically the supply side of the business. And I did that for about 2-3 years. Basically, it was, you can think of as building a lot of 0 to 1 functions, right? The supply side of the business, the entire partner management team to support that business globally, and so on. And then, sort of I felt, okay, I've done enough on the supply side, and I was at that time thinking of, what next, and how do I really, grow. And I think again, for me, it was very fortunate because I was able to find opportunities within the organization, right? I think a lot of times when people are thinking what next and growth,
and they get stuck.
Yeah.
Because the company is growing and there's more opportunities being created. So
yeah. And then a lot of times you think, okay, it's best to think external instead of internal. And I think I've been fortunate that way that, because I joined at an early time, I was able to, have those more honest and direct conversations, even with the founders, right? To say, okay, I'm looking for growth, what next? And they were able to help me, navigate and shape the next set of opportunities. Yeah.
And from the supply side, you sort of moved to monetization.
Yeah, so then I moved to the other side completely, which was the demand or the advertiser side. And that was scary.
Why so?
Because see, earlier we were earning money for publishers and paying them money, and the demand side meant you had to get money from advertisers. So that's
getting money is more harder, right?
So that's how my India head role materialized, because we already had a business in India. We wanted to sort of take it to the next level. I ended up, taking up that role in 2016. And that was, so I had a lot of BD experience by them, BD,
partnerships, all of those.
But not so much sales, because this was then, almost direct media, digital media sales.
When you do sales, you carry a target on your head.
You have a target, you have, quarterly goals, and
all of those
it's a
things,
continuous thing. So that's something I had to really, I think, learn from scratch in my first year in the role. And I was actually operating with a team, right? So there was I had to build trust and credibility with them while also...
How big was the team?
We were about 20-25 people across, hunting and farming at that time. And it was, why I said, scary was because I was trying to, learn on the job, and then also, sort of mentor them, help them, grow and so on as well. And then obviously we had, pressure to grow the business and so on. So that was a very steep learning curve on the sales and revenue side.
So Vasuta, can you tell us about some experiences where some clients or some categories were difficult to sort of penetrate or sort of get on board? How did you manage to sort of get them on board? And in hindsight, they've become a really large contributor to the business.
So I think, when I started the India role, that time actually, all what we call digital natives as client, right? Anyone who has an app first business, e-commerce and fintech and gaming, all these guys, that category was very big. It had grown big because of all the funding that happened in the 2 years before that, but it was going through a cycle, as does that industry. Correct. There are funding winters, and then marketing spends go down, and then it comes back and so on. So we realized that some of the highs that we had seen were very linked to them trying to link it to their own growth for this segment or industry. And so we had to refine our product a lot more, right?
Got
to
it.
be more linked to ROI and KPI of that digital native segment for us to really even have a proposition for them. And I think that really helped us from an overall lens, because we started investing in that from a product lens, very early on. And now, as you're aware, right, that segments, the needs of ROI, KPIs have only grown over the years.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And it's never been about just give me, say, X downloads or just, X users. So I think that product investment was a good bet to take for that category. And we actually had to retrain our sales team, even hire people who could be performance specialists, because we didn't have that 8-9 years back. So I think a lot of product investment and education and training for the sales team was very important to crack that segment.
So you believe when you have specialist salespeople going to a digital native client, could be e-commerce or fintech, does it really add value, or does it give you the delta over as opposed to another good sales guy going over there?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, at least we've believed that, and I've seen that as well, right? Especially when it comes to digital natives and performance marketing. It's a very product-led, even very technical conversation. It's a very data-led conversation, right? Even about metrics and funnels and attribution and some of those things. And I think not everybody can do that or enjoys doing that.
Correct.
Right, in a digital sales world. So we had a very specialized performance sales and account management team to run that business, and I set that up separately for India. We had that again, the same across markets. So I think that has helped for sure. It definitely, there is merit in specialized sales team, especially for certain products.
And in your line of business, InMobi, who would you say are the main stakeholders? Is it the agency or the direct client, or combination of both?
It's a combination of both, because there are advertisers who work directly, there are advertisers who work through an agency, right? But what you will see in general in the ecosystem is that a lot of the performance spends have moved in-house, or people have in-house marketing teams handling a lot of the performance spends, especially for digital natives. And a lot of the brand centric spends still happen through agencies, because that media mix is still being managed across channels, from TV and print to
all of those things
and mobile. So both are stakeholders for us, and I think that was the other thing, right? Even for us, that how do we also make sure we're engaging with all stakeholders? See, because I think in any business you need to understand where the decision making lies when it comes to cracking a pitch, and that was the other thing that we invested in, right? Our relationship with digital agencies, because there was a clear understanding that it is not just direct advertisers who are a stakeholder, but even digital agencies. So I think mapping that out is very important.
So when you talk about the relationship with agencies, is it the standard workshops and roadshows and all of those things, or how do you sort of build that connect with the agencies so that a larger part of the business comes to you? I know Google and Meta and have all these agency teams which sort of work closely with the Groupons of the world.
Yeah.
Was it a similar model that InMobi followed?
Yeah, I think typically that's what with the agencies it operates in that way, right? That you need to invest in product education, platform awareness, right? There's a lot of that you need to do, and I think then the solution that you have also needs to click with them and be a little bit differentiated. Because otherwise it's hard for them also then to go and pitch that to a client, or put that, for example, in a media plan. So that was a lot of investment that we did with some of the key agencies around product education and platform awareness, and then obviously joint business plans and commercial deals and so on are a part of that. But there is that investment, and especially for let's say CPG brands, or some of like tech, telco, OEM kind of brands, a lot of their spends are concentrated with the agencies.
Got it. So now moving on to some of the other aspects of sales and business development, which is a team. How do you build a strong, high performance team? What is your thoughts on that, and how did you build up a team over the last many years?
So, I think especially in this business of digital and mobile media, I think in the early phase of this, a lot of the people who were coming in the sales teams would typically be people who had sold other media and then were moving to digital as a progression and so on. And what we found is that that is a hard change for people to make.
Okay.
Right? So I think especially in terms of just hiring itself, we were, or at least the way I thought about it is that it was okay to get people who didn't have media experience, but would be good at product understanding, would be good at, data and analytics, and obviously had, the ability to communicate well with clients, etc., to build the sales team, right? Because we were always a mobile first, company, a mobile first media in some ways. And it was harder to retrain people than train people who didn't necessarily have the media experience. So a lot of, you can say, maybe 50% or so of the team were people who had the past experience of media, and about 50% who didn't, but were willing to learn, were willing to understand the product, and a good balance of that.
So that is the team composition that how you form. How do you drive the team towards performance? Because you've now, first step is obviously hiring the right resources. Now, how do you drive them towards achieving the goal that you've set for the company, the team?
I think for that, 2-3 things which are important, right? I think one is making sure that obviously the goal setting and incentive process is a very key part of any high performing sales team, right? So the goals you set, while they're aggressive, they also have to be somewhere in the realm of achievement and possibility, so that people feel motivated to get to that, right? And of course the incentives associated with that, right? Also how some of that operates, like sometimes when we wanted to drive a certain product adoption or a certain, let's say seasonal push, then we would run some very interesting programs, right, of incentives and so on, in addition to the regular sort of quarterly variables and all that people get. So I think goal setting and the incentive alignment is a very important part. But I think the high performance part also comes from a lot of, I think, how you train, retrain the team, right? Especially in this business, right? Which is also evolving very fast.
Absolutely.
You have new products coming out, every 3 to 6 months. You have some regulation change, some new, data thing which will come up. So there's a need to, also retrain, train, keep doing that and equipping people, because people have to feel like they can, go and really stand in front of a client and, do that. So I think that was another key aspect, right, of developing a high performing team, so that they have the product understanding, they have a product knowledge, and we focused a lot on that. And I think the third team part is that teams need to feel supported. They need to feel enabled, right? So a lot of times, let's say where we were stuck or we were not making progress, then between me and the regional leads for each zone also, we would sort of step in. We would try to get our connects, pool our connects, figure out how do we reach out to the right people. If you're not able to find something bottom up, how do we come top down for certain things. So we did a lot of hustling needed to happen in certain situations, right? To especially crack things where they are blocked. But that also brings the team together, because they feel like, people are in it together with us, and this is just not my job.
So this is the part of the hype of, who is, according to you, a good salesperson? I mean, you've managed teams, and what are the characteristics you've identified? These are 2 or 3 characteristics a good sales guy should have. Typically, sales, people, sales in business development, there's a little stereotypical notion that he's fast talking, he's a hustler, he sort of sells you, he can sell in what do you call, ice to an Eskimo. But the truth is actually different. So what do you think are the facets of a good salesperson?
I think obviously, client communication and presence is a given, right? You should be able to go and speak to people, and if that's not something someone even wants to do or enjoys, then it's tough. But I think it doesn't have to be all what a lot of people think, a lot of flamboyance. It's not necessary that people have to be an extrovert to do that, right?
That's a big one.
Some of the best people I've seen, they appear very quiet, very like in office you won't even know that they are there, but when they go and speak to a client or they make a pitch, they are going to close it, right? So I think the ability to connect to people, and the client is very important. And I think a big part of that also comes from listening, right? Because I think as a salesperson, you also need the ability to listen, not just talk.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't understand what the client is looking for, you'll just go pitch your product, try to force fit something, and it's never going to close. So that's what I at least tell a lot of people, that I've worked with, that you need to listen. And it's okay if something actually doesn't close in the first meeting, right? At least establish a connect and get a follow-up, right? Because that itself is a win, right? That if a person is willing to meet you a second time, that means you left some impact.
Something.
So I think that's a great ability to connect with people, to listen to people, so that they want to meet you the next time. And that actually can contribute in a great way to someone being a good salesperson. And then I think there's also a big element of, I would say, discipline, right? Because as a salesperson, for example, there are some people who may be very lucky that they will do 5 meetings in a month and convert 100%. But the best salespeople are the ones who are very diligent about, okay, this is the number of emails I sent, and this is what the number of conversations. And these people I have seen, they do this without someone asking them to do it.
Correct.
Right? Like nobody is standing over their shoulder to say how many opportunities did you create, right? So they have sort of a self-discipline, self-rigor with which they operate. And that contributes to high performance ultimately, because it's not just about being lucky.
Correct.
It requires...
There's a method to the madness. There is
madness
all of those things. Process is important, right?
Yeah. So I think those things contribute to someone being really good.
So moving on, so Vasuta, that you manage a large revenue responsibility, how do you make sure the projection and all of that is accurate? Because there will be monthly, quarterly sort of goals, and then you're responsible to your superiors or the management in terms of reporting the numbers. How do you manage the whole sales funnel or the process to make sure the numbers are within a tolerable limit?
See, I think
So what tools you use and what is the rigor for that?
Yeah. I think, every planning exercise that we do, right, usually you start with an annual planning exercise, which is more, at a company level where you want to get to, what are your operating, goals and so on. And then start breaking that down, bringing it to quarterly, monthly. So there is a top-down planning aspect of it, right, where it starts from, or it's the starting point. And then there is what we call a bottom-up planning exercise, which is, then sitting with each team, each leader, and saying, okay, now let's look at the bottom up, right? Which are our existing accounts, which are new opportunities, which are new products, right? What is it that is going to, and then try to see, okay, how does the top down direction and bottom up planning really come together, right? So, and why I say this, because I think planning is a very important part on, ultimately the forecasting and where you get to, right? Because if you don't plan well, then anyways it's going to be hard. So that's a big part, right, where you look at all those aspects. And then I think in terms of forecasting, I really think it's very important if you are leading revenue, right, and especially say in media as an industry, right, where there is it's more campaigns and so on, right? It's not a SaaS or subscription business.
Absolutely.
Where okay, this is my recurring revenue for the next 12 months and so on. I think it's
this is more cyclical in nature.
It's more cyclical. There are seasonal aspects to it. It's impacted by a lot of things, right? So for example, when this whole war broke out in the Middle East, we did not anticipate that clients in Southeast Asia would, stop spending, because, they have presence there, and they are, looking at their brand presence and, how their brand gets seen externally. So there's so many factors which affect the business. So I think having a pulse on a weekly basis is very important, right? So at least I believe in a very strong cadence of, reviews at the right frequency, whatever that is, weekly, fortnightly, where we are having a real discussion, and it is not just, sort of in the air, right? Where we look at, the ground reality by market, by key accounts, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges. And that's one way to sort of do that. And then if you are seeing red flags or anything, to also bring that awareness early on into the system, right? So there are no surprises at the end of the quarter where you are miles away. So I think those are just, simple, I would say, things to really keep a good pulse on the business, to have a strong cadence of reviews. And at least, for me, like I keep zooming in, zooming out into like, okay, areas where I think are going not so well or areas which are going really well, how do I support that? How do I, jump in where there is, some challenge or issue? So do that, very frequently.
So even InMobi's got global presence and global clients. Can you just talk to us about some of the global clients and some of the differences or nuances you find between the Indian market and maybe the US market or the Middle East market?
Yeah. So I think, yes, we have, almost clients across almost 15 to 20 countries. And there are some market similarities across some markets. So we see similarities across, for example, Southeast Asia, India, Middle East, some of the emerging markets, right? Even Latin America. And then there are some of the
similarities in terms of.
So similarities in terms of, for example, their understanding itself of, say, mobile marketing, right? The kind of goals and KPIs that they may have, because it's a function ultimately of the user base in some of these markets, right? Because ultimately an advertiser is serving its customer.
Correct.
And we're serving the advertiser, right? So it's a reflection of that, right? That who is their customer, what kind of marketing goals they have, where does mobile fit into their scheme of things, right? So in that sense, some of the technologies, some of the marketing goals, even some of the pricing, right, tends to be in a similar ballpark in some of the emerging markets. And what we've seen is that, especially for us, since we're global, a lot of, like new things, right, like programmatic as a big area to invest in, really started in the US for us back in 2015-16, when that was, the first time we started investing in our programmatic product stack, for example. Or iOS as a business and investing behind that, or a lot of data and identity solutions, because some of these things just come first in these markets in terms of awareness,
and then it percolates down,
and then they percolate, and that has helped us, because then it allows us to develop for some of these markets ahead of the curve, and then be able to take that globally.
So those are the cross learnings
in terms of product, in terms of how different customers behave, how they're structured, and so on. And ultimately, because we are on the InMobi side in the mobile marketing space, it's a reflection of the user base in these markets, right? The ARPU of a user is very different in the USA vis-a-vis.
Absolutely, there's a significant difference.
So you see pricing differences. That's why you also see some of the goal differences. You'll even see sectoral differences, right? For example, because in-app purchase is a big component in gaming developers, right? Like in the US, people spend a lot of money on in-app purchases vis-a-vis, say,
India.
In India. So you will see, a lot of the advertising spends in the US, for example, are in gaming. As an industry, right? Whereas it will not be that dominant in some of these markets. So some of those differences also exist.
So because InMobi has a large international footprint, so like you said, you started out in India and you expanded globally. How important was the company branding and and other elements that added to the success? Because when you go to a new foreign market, you're an unknown entity. How do you sort of build a brand and grow?
I think
any
yes,
learnings?
Absolutely. It's not an easy thing, and especially I think when we expanded outside India, it was maybe we started in like 2010, 2011 when we actually started expanding outside India, right? We actually started with adjacent markets first in Southeast Asia and Middle East, and then expanded to like US, Europe around 2012-13. So it is obviously not easy when you're trying to go global from India, and there is a lot you need to invest in terms of establishing your brand presence. And because we were not a B2C company on the InMobi side, it's not about just user level branding, right? You need to establish your presence with B2B customers and in the B2B space. I think what helped us was we were able to find strong local leaders in the early years, right?
Okay.
So to establish the local markets, the local teams, and that helped a lot in the early years.
So hiring was important. Hiring the key people were important.
Hiring the key people in these markets was important. Making sure that our product could work in these markets was important, because a big part of your branding and credibility was also from your product.
Absolutely.
Because you were in the B2B space. So that was important. And then of course some element of marketing and so on. So as we established our presence in these markets, we did invest in things like trade events, in some bit of PR and so on, for the right things. Customer referrals and testimonials play a very huge part when you're trying to establish yourself in newer markets. So we invested behind that. Things like awards for the work that you do.
Got it.
So I think a lot of these things are very important to
So
establish.
the ad techs of the world and all of those things are important.
So the credentials, establishing the trust comes from a lot of this. So that's what we sort of invested in different markets. There is no overnight thing.
Exactly, no overnight success.
All of
it's
this
a series of small steps, and
all of this takes time. And I mean, we've been around for about 16 years, so you can imagine that it's.
When was the inflection point when you thought, hey, this is now not showing a linear growth, it's showing a exponential growth?
I think that actually happened in the early years when we moved from the SMS world to the world of apps, right?
Okay.
Because and it was a combination of both the ecosystem, because if you remember, Android and iOS was not that big till about 2009, 10. I think 2011, 12, this Android and iOS ecosystem of apps started gaining traction.
And we had those feature phones back then.
And we had feature phones, so smartphones, the whole Android, iOS app ecosystem. And we were at a great point at that time, because we were trying to transition from the world of SMS and the VAS business and so on into something like this. And obviously it helped that we also raised funding at that time, which really helped fuel the growth. So it was a combination of the right ecosystem,
confluences of all the right things happening together.
Growth was happening, obviously capital, and then us being at a place where we could capture that growth, because by then we had already been around for 2-3 years. We had at least a basic product and platform in place.
Got it. Sounds good. So Vasuta, I'll move into the last segment of our conversation. So these are just some rapid questions I'll ask you. Which are the 3 books that influenced you?
I've not had a chance to read a lot of books in the last couple of years, given my daughter's just 3, but I think 2 or 3 that I've read, I would say more in recent times. So one was, this Indra Nui's My Life in Full. I found that very inspiring. She wrote that after she had retired. Another one that I read, which I recommend, for a lot of women, is this Palace of Illusions, which is Mahabharat's take, but through Draupadi's eyes. Right.
Palace of Illusions.
Yeah, and I'm calling out all these with female protagonists, but I've been reading a lot of that in whatever time I get in the last couple of years. But yeah, 2 top of mind that I can think of.
Oh, wonderful. Now, what advice would you give to young women starting out? What are 3 or 4 things that you would advise to somebody just out of a B school with a great record?
See, I would say that, the first one is that don't hesitate to, state your goals and your ambitions. I think, at least I had that, right? But in the early years, I was just uncomfortable to, be ambitious or be aspirational. So I think, don't hesitate on that. Second is, I think, continuously step outside of your comfort zone. Like for me, I stepped from product to strategy to BD to sales to different things. Step outside your comfort zone, because I think growth comes from that. And I think for women, it's absolutely important to have a support ecosystem at home and in the workplace, because that's the only way you can manage a career. So be ambitious, step outside of your comfort zone, and have a support ecosystem.
Now, let's say, example, you have a non-performer in your team. What is your philosophy or policy? Would you sort of recommend more training or recommend cutting ties?
See, I believe in training as a first step, training and feedback, because I think if we hired someone, there was an equal responsibility on both sides. So I do believe in training and feedback, and even looking at alternate roles, right, if that one's not a fit. But yeah, if nothing pans out, then of course, there's always, then maybe you part ties, but definitely training, feedback as the first step.
Who would you consider your role model and why?
I think, like I said earlier as well, I was very, heavily influenced by my parents, and that shaped a lot of, my journey. So I think my dad was a huge role model for me because of just how he balanced two careers and a family through my growing up years, and, my mom for being a working woman in the 80s and 90s. And a lot of that, I think, seeped into my upbringing and, how I shaped my own journey.
Got it. Now, can you name a deal that you did which you wish you hadn't done?
I think that's a hard one.
Because we all make bad deals, but which one would you think is not?
Yeah, I can't really, name one. But I think sometimes, you do deals which you enter into with a certain, expectation, and then first 3 or 6 months it didn't work out, and that happened to us. And I think in those situations it's better to cut ties early than late, because it can be painful for all parties. So that's the only advice I would have.
And what are 3 or 4 tenets of sales? What is your sales philosophy now? Because now you manage a large sales team and monetization team. What is your belief system?
I think, a couple of things. I think one is that build, client relationships or partner relationships for the long term, because ultimately it's about repeat business and not just one-time business in any industry. So
Absolutely.
I think it has to be long-term relationships. I think it's okay to walk away from a deal. So, know what you are okay to walk away from, and don't force fit your product. Don't, pitch too hard. Listen, and then try to offer the right solution for the client.
Now, since InMobi was a startup success, any advice would you give to startup founders? Because you've worked with the founding team closely and you've seen what it takes to be a successful startup.
Yeah, I think as an early employee, one thing I can say which has worked really beautifully here is, I think the culture and the team play a very strong role, because with startups, right, you will have the ups and downs, you will have different cycles. But I think if you have a strong culture and a good team, then they can really hold it together and weather through, any situation. And at least that's what I've seen for the last decade plus that I've been here. That's made us different and, successful.
Got it. Now, given a choice, would you like to have another career option, and if so, why?
I think right now I feel like, I don't have any regrets on my career choices or my profession. But yeah, at some point, maybe, it would be interesting to go back to what I wanted to be as a child and see, if I want to teach someday in some capacity. So who knows?
And finally, what is your idea of sort of winding down, relaxation? How do you sort of do that, balance work and family life together?
So, a lot of my winding down earlier used to be, either reading or, binge watching even, stuff on some of the OTT stuff, because it just, you don't think about anything else at the time. But yeah, now a lot of it is spending time with my daughter because, she doesn't let you do anything else. So yeah, that I think I've understood, how people say that, with kids you sort of forget everything else. And that's been a true, relaxation and winding down in the last couple of years, to just spend time with her.
Wonderful, I'm sure that is. So Vasuta, thank you for having a conversation with us, sharing your experiences, your journey at InMobi and all the other things, wonderful things you've done. And it was great talking to you. I wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.